Folks, you might recall last October's episode of Coup Save America when I shared the story of my own declining health and the arduous process of applying for and eventually being granted Social Security disability insurance through the federal government. While my application journey was long and complicated, I was nonetheless fortunate compared to the average person seeking to collect from an insurance system that they have paid into on good faith. Imagine if I'd had no friends nor family to support me during the nearly 2 years while I was unable to work and receiving no income. Imagine if I'd had no state benefits to help me pay for my ever-mounting medical bills. Imagine if I had to wait long months for a court date, only to hear a judge tell me that I'm not disabled and that his doctors know more about me than my own doctors do. Then just imagine if I appealed every unfavorable court decision for the next several years, but I still wasn't approved for SSDI. The ongoing nightmare I just described is a sad reality for far too many people, one of whom we met in our last episode on this issue, Emily, a Social Security disability applicant who I again interviewed during our previous episode about the shortcomings of this country's disability system. Emily is someone who suffers from fibromyalgia, migraine headaches, anxiety, and depression. She spoke with us about her struggle to prove the validity of these quote-unquote invisible disabilities, as she waited for her second chance to appeal to a federal-level judge in the U.S. District Court. Furthermore, Emily helped us to gain empathy and understanding for what it's like to be an individual fighting for a sense of dignity in a world that's turned her entire life upside down. She said, people don't understand that disability is not just a matter of not being able to work. It's an entire way of life. She went on to say that it strains everything emotionally, physically, and socially. It's very inhibiting. Since my diagnosis and since I applied for disability in 2018, I have lost the majority of my community. I have lost my marriage, and I have lost my support. Talk about kicking somebody when they're already down and in pain. Our country's Social Security and disability system doesn't even try to hide the fact that it operates in a way that forces people to give up the fight before they can win. And in some sad cases, people even pass away before their case ever makes it to a courtroom. Their illness or injuries might take them, or they simply might lose the will to continue a life of physical pain and mental anguish, on top of their loss of employment identity and their financial distress. As I revealed in my previous monologue, adults with disabilities are 3 times more likely to suffer from suicidal ideation, and that is according to a 2021 report from the Centers for Disease Control. How can it possibly take so long for a disabled person to be approved for Social Security disability insurance? To hear a behind-the-scenes account from an inside source, I spoke with Spencer Bishins, an attorney who worked at the Social Security Administration for more than 10 years, and who has authored an eye-opening book that I encourage you to read. It is titled Social Security Disability Revealed: Why It's So Hard to Access Benefits and What You Can Do About It. In his interview, Mr. Bishins talked about how the Social Security Administration sets up applicants to fail at both the state and the federal level. He told us horror stories about the heavy caseloads shouldered by the judges and the stacks of paperwork passed along to the attorneys under them, which assured that nobody involved really had the time to properly investigate each individual claim. He explained the lack of empathy that many judges take to the bench due to their own life experiences that keep them so separated from the people they are, called upon to serve. And most of all, Mr. Bishins told us about the denial quotas placed upon judges and the disapproval and sometimes outright dismissal that may go along with issuing too many decisions in favor of the disability applicant. He described how it was literally his job to misconstrue evidence in a way so that he could write a denial, and how much of the time the judges are aware that they've ruled incorrectly, but are happy nonetheless to push their faulty decisions through the system, hoping that blatant mistakes will be overlooked or that applicants will just get discouraged by the process and give up. The denial tactics employed by the Social Security Administration, they are a mass travesty of justice. But who is there beside this, and who's going to complain, right? Besides our country's citizens with disabilities, which is a population that is regularly shoved aside and disregarded by society. Well, folks, I'm here with a very small glimmer of good news. The reason that Coup Save America is doing a follow-up episode on the broken condition of Social Security disability insurance. Finally, someone, it seems, has taken notice and has drawn attention to this troubling system that further disables the already disabled. 2 months ago, in May of 2023, Lisa Rain of the Washington Post published an article titled, "Judges Rebuke Social Security for Errors as Dismissal Denials Stack Up." In this 8-page article, Rain reveals much of the information that Spencer Bishins already shared with Coup Save America, which is, of course, no surprise considering that she also interviewed Mr. Bishins for her piece. Rain reports that according to 2022 application numbers, quote, approval rates for benefits are down at nearly every level of review, end quote. To help us understand what is meant by the different levels of review, let me just quickly run down the lengthy appeals process that an applicant might be required to navigate to apply for Social Security and disability insurance. The journey begins with, of course, an initial application, the majority of which are all denied. Next, the applicant is invited to submit an appeal for their case to be looked at a second time. If denied again, which is highly likely, the third step is a court hearing before a Social Security judge. Now, this stage of the process results in the highest approval rate, which was still only around 50% according to 2022 statistics. After receiving an official denial from a court judge, the fourth step of the process is to ask that your case be reviewed by an internal office of the Social Security Department called the Appeals Council. Now, this seems to be the most useless stage of an already circuitous path, since in 2022, only 4% of applicants were granted approval at this level. 12% of cases were sent back a step to be retried by a Social Security judge, while a massive 84% of cases were outright denied for the fourth time. It's only after navigating through these 4 and possibly more phases within the Department of Social Security that an applicant's case is eligible to be looked at by a federal court outside of the department. This district court can issue a final denial indicating the end of the road for the claimant, or they can override previous decisions and approve the application. In 2022, only 5% of applicants prevailed and began collecting their benefits, while 37% were denied. But what about the other 58% of appeals to the federal court system? What happened to all those folks? Well, herein lies the problem and the very premise for the Washington Post's scathing article. In 58% of 2022 hearings, federal court judges sent or remanded the cases back to the Social Security courts with the message of something along the lines of, something is wrong here, you people need to look over the evidence again. This pattern of roughly 50% of federal appeals being remanded back to the Social Security office has persisted over the past decade, causing ever-increasing concern over the quality of work being produced by this department. To make matters even worse, when a case is remanded, well, it's typically referred to the same courtroom of the same judge who already made what the federal appeals court deemed to be a flawed decision. The philosophy behind this approach, I guess, is to save time and resources by referring each case back to a judge who is, at least theoretically, already familiar with the circumstances of the claim, and then allowing that judge to correct their own mistakes. But again, the obvious problem is that judges are highly likely to scoff and essentially say, what mistakes? I made the right decision the first time. The claim is denied again and appealed back to the federal court system, creating a loop of confusion, incompetency, and wasted time, not to mention wasted money. To demonstrate how SSDI cases can drag on and on, the Washington Post article uses the example of a Colorado man who was severely injured in a workplace accident back in 2006. He was finally approved for disability benefits in 2023, after a 14-year-long battle. Likewise, to further confirm the premise of the article, well, we checked back with Emily, Coup Save America's own SSDI applicant, for an update on the progress of her claim. When we last heard from Emily in October of 2022, her case had run the entire gamut of stages and appeals. She had had a hearing at the federal court level, after which her case was remanded back to the Social Security courts on the grounds that they had issued a poor decision. At that point, the Social Security Administration denied her claim yet again. After a long 9-month wait, in June of 2023, Emily was granted a second appeal in front of a U.S. district judge, a representative of the federal court system. Just like the time before, this judge was highly critical that the agency's second denial was simply not supported by the tremendous amount of medical evidence proving that Emily is legitimately disabled. So once again, the case was remanded back to the Social Security Administration. Now, while she obviously feels validated by the U.S. District Judge's empathy toward her situation, merely being believed does not pay the bills. At this point, Emily has completed 7 of the 5 steps in the Social Security and Disability Insurance process and is on her way to step 8. Depending on the next set of findings, this wasteful loop could continue, and Emily's journey might extend to steps 9, 10, 11, 12. You get the picture. The article speaks of a policy that changed in 2017, which has vastly contributed to the epidemic of faulty decisions and remands back to the Social Security court system. To quote, "Now judges are free to disregard the opinions of an applicant's treating physicians and rely instead heavily upon contracted doctors who examine claimants for, wait for it, as little as 15 minutes. This often leads to shoddy records and poor decisions, federal courts have found. No kidding. I can't think of a more counterintuitive policy to put into practice, and it is no wonder that Social Security and disability insurance cases are circling to the courts, as if caught in a whirlwind of obvious ineptness. Lisa Rain's entire Washington Post article is an infuriating and eye-opening read, and we're going to include a link to the article in the show notes for this episode. Also fascinating are the nearly 2,000 comments submitted after the article's publication. I committed myself to exploring these comments so that I could gain a little bit better understanding of the general public's opinion on this subject. But I admittedly got bogged down after reading 50 or so of the well over 200 pages of responses. For the most part, people exhibited the appropriate outrage and empathy that such an article should in fact garnish. Some of them shared their own stories and vented their own frustrations and even proposed potential solutions to the problems within our government operations. Most interesting, however, were the comments from the readers who support the current system and who hold erroneous beliefs about Social Security disability insurance, and of course the people who apply for benefits. Now, I'd like to discuss and hopefully dispel the top 3 most pervasive myths about SSDI. The first myth is that people who receive disability payments are a drain on society and are simply suckling from the taxpayer teat. This is a troubling and persistent belief that people who collect Social Security and disability insurance are living off government handouts. But this couldn't be further from the truth. As workers, we pay in to the pool for disability insurance while hoping that we never have to dip back into it. Social Security and disability insurance is a safety net that workers have collectively strung up to catch those who might fall. And if a person has never worked and never paid into the pool, well, they're not eligible to withdraw and benefit from it. In addition, withdrawal amounts are granted in direct correlation with how much an individual has contributed. So there's nobody that is taking advantage of anyone else by collecting on a benefit that they have rightfully earned. Social Security and disability insurance is an entitlement, not a charity. I won't say much more about this, as our previous episode already talked a great deal around the stigma that surrounds being a recipient of Social Security and disability insurance, or even just simply being disabled. But I want to leave you with this analogy. Imagine that you're driving your car and you get into an accident. When you contact your insurance agency to file a claim, does anyone ever say, "Shame on you, you're taking a handout from State Farm instead of standing on your own 2 feet," or, "Hey, my insurance payment just funded your claim. Why should I have to pay for your accident?" Of course nobody says these things, because that's exactly how car insurance is supposed to work. And it is exactly the same with Social Security and disability insurance. Yet so many people fail to understand this. Another prevailing myth within certain circles is that people who file for SSDI simply don't want to work. They're lazy, and so they can use their medical conditions as an excuse to collect a freebie paycheck while sitting around all day doing nothing. There seems to be a short-sighted, yet pervasive opinion that there are only two types of disability recipients. Those that are so severely disabled that it's obvious from a glance that they are unable to support themselves. And then there are those who simply aren't trying hard enough. Reading the article and the comments made it clear that many people have a distorted idea of how easy it is to make some money some other way after you've lost your ability to function in the job that you've been doing and educated and trained to perform. Sadly, the Social Security Administration holds similar beliefs. And they often deny claims on the grounds that while a person might be too disabled to work as a firefighter, for instance, well, they could simply change careers and become a stockbroker who sits at a desk all day. Thinking like this ignores many factors, such as an overall physical or mental pain that interferes with any kind of reliable employment, and the type and availability of alternative job choices in the area where a person lives. Certainly, a person can switch careers in their lifetime due to personal preference or a change in circumstances, and many people who are struck with a disability do, in fact, take this route. But it's not an option for everyone, nor is it easy to accomplish, as some people seem to think. One commenter, for instance, suggested that people who become disabled, well, they can simply open an Etsy store to support themselves. As you can imagine, this comment spurred some very animated discussions. Most people who become disabled do not do so on purpose, and they are not one bit happy with the situation that's been forced upon them. As Emily stated when I interviewed her back in October, she said, "I was in the middle of a second graduate degree so that I could do my job better. I mean, like, I was not playing around. I love to work. I love to show up and do my job." End quote. Even when unable to maintain a form of ongoing gainful employment, people living with disabilities, they have the same desire as anyone else to feel useful, fulfilled, and to contribute to society. Those of us who are limited in our capacity to do manual labor or perform in a 9-to-5 work environment must adapt and do what we can to maintain our dignity as valuable citizens of the world. Coup Save America is a prime example of such an endeavor. While my medical conditions do not allow me to work on a reliable schedule, I have still sought fulfillment by co-founding a nonprofit organization and by creating this show and podcast that I feel I can work on when I'm able to do so. There's no requirement that I must release a new episode every Tuesday if my health is in a period of decline, much to my producer's dismay. One SSDI recipient posted this sentiment: "I deal with the loss of my career by creating meaningful volunteer work of my own creation. I do things that are on my own schedule, don't involve driving, allow me to work at my own pace and rest. I volunteer for Billion Graves, fight invasive species, volunteer teach online, care for my many adopted pets, and a variety of other things that let me work on rebuilding abilities and have a useful life." Perhaps the biggest and most vicious myth surrounding Social Security disability insurance is that the system is rampant with fraud. Circling back to the idea that many people are lazy and don't want to work for a living, there exists a deep-seated belief that a high percentage of disability applicants are filed with misleading information, and even outright lies put forth by degenerates who strive to take advantage of this route to so-called easy money. It does not matter that statistics simply fail to back up this myth, because the people who perpetuate it are driven by gut feelings and distorted viewpoints about the nature of their fellow human beings. So let's take a look at the facts, shall we? There is a whole slew of agencies who watchdog Social Security disability insurance and have collectively found no significant evidence that recipients are committing fraud. Let's start with the Social Security Administration itself, who we already know to be almost oppressively stingy about paying out claims. Even after the Social Security Administration has approved an individual for Social Security disability insurance, their department continues to conduct disability reviews on that person, plus randomly selects cases for deeper assessments of fraud. For decades, these Social Security reviews have confirmed very low numbers of fraud. But maybe we don't want to trust the findings of an agency with a vested interest in promoting the image of running like a well-oiled machine. Well, in that case, we can simply look to studies and reviews conducted by the Office of the Inspector General, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the National Research Council, and the Institute of Medicine, all of whom were unable to uncover even a 1% occurrence of fraud in the receipt of Social Security and disability insurance payments. Thus far, there has only been one major and highly publicized case of disability fraud, which occurred back in 2015. An attorney in Long Island, New York, led a scheme where 131 police officers and firefighters used a rehearsed list of symptoms to falsify claims of severe psychological damage, mostly related to the 9/11 terrorist attack. The group of fraudsters represents a minutely small number of Social Security and disability applicants, not to mention that their deception was detected and subsequently punished. There is simply no massive epidemic of Social Security and disability insurance fraud, and it's ridiculously ideological to think that such a thing would be happening. What people either fail to understand or choose to ignore when they talk snidely about those people who are intent to cheat the system is the unfortunate fact that most Social Security and disability insurance payments are just barely keep recipients above the poverty level. Once we realize that 90% of Social Security and disability insurance beneficiaries receive less than $2,000 per month, and they aren't permitted to even earn any additional income, how can we even imagine that people are voluntarily lining up to commit themselves to a life of barely scraping by? Yet anecdotal evidence of Social Security disability insurance fraud abounds, and many people cling to their mythical belief systems because it's the way they prefer to view the world. If certain people were to listen to this podcast and hear me talk about myself, Emily, and other SSDI recipients who would love to go out and work, these people might respond with, well, okay, but that's just you. I know a guy who brags about how he conned his way into an SSDI check, and now he works under the table to make even more money. It's absolutely true that no one person's experience is proof of a trend. Just because Emily wishes she could go back to work does not mean that all persons living with disability feel the same way. Alternatively, just because we all know a guy who fails to abide by the rules agreed upon by society does not mean that everyone else is like him or her. It's simply human nature for us to place more value on information that aligns with what we prefer to believe. So I tend to see a world full of Emilys, while others might sink their teeth into every example of SSDI fraud and hold on for dear life. The difference between each of us choosing to give weight to the anecdotal accounts that we like the best is that the facts and statistics confirm my personal belief that fraud is nearly non-existent in the Social Security disability insurance system. So, with our resident author and expert Spencer Bishins telling us that the process of approving Social Security and disability insurance claims is flawed, and with Lisa Rain of the Washington Post backing up every single thing he says in his book, and with the U.S. District Court judges speaking out to say that something isn't right, what must we ask are the solutions to these extensive problems within the Social Security Administration? I, for one, don't know, which is why I've invited Spencer Bishins back on the show to share more of his knowledge and expert insights. What I do know is that reforming Social Security and disability insurance is a matter of the U.S. people understanding and reassessing how we handle our resources in both this and countless other areas of government operation. We are faced with a sobering reality as we look at our nation's expenditure and its reflection of our priorities. According to the Venerable Kiel Institute for World Economy, a crucial analysis reveals a rather telling picture of where our resources are being directed. The Biden administration, along with our U.S. Congress, has funneled an astounding sum of over $750 million to Ukraine ever since the onset of the insidious proxy war with Russia. This monetary assistance blankets a wide variety of aspects, from so-called humanitarian aid that tries to ease the immediate pain of the conflict to the more long-term provisions of financial support, and even extending to the contentious terrain of military resources. The figure is vast, and the intent behind it is clear. Another testament to this trend is the powerful show of bipartisanship unity in our usually fragmented Congress. There was an overwhelming majority vote of 360 to 64 favoring the Invest to Protect Act, a sophisticated, broad-ranging package comprising four separate bills. The purpose of this act is to channel an annual $60 million for a period of 5 years directly to local police departments across the nation. Moreover, the proposed budget of President Biden for the fiscal year 2024 earmarks an impressive $842 billion for the Pentagon's vast operations, with an additional $44 billion reserved for defense-related programs in various key agencies, including the esteemed Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Energy. It's critical to note that the proposed budget represents a significant leap of $28 million compared to the previous year. However, while such extensive military and defense-related spending undeniably underscores a shift in priorities toward warfare efforts, it inadvertently casts a harsh light on another deeply concerning issue: the neglect of domestic needs and the interest of the American people. As we dwell on this expenditure, we must juxtapose it with another startling statistic. Homelessness in our country is on an alarming rise. The Department of Housing and Urban Development's pre-pandemic data paints a bleak picture of 15.6% surge in the national homeless population. California, a state that adopted the Housing First approach in 2016, was particularly hard hit, witnessing a staggering 33.8% surge in homelessness based on pre-pandemic data. Meanwhile, the healthcare woes of millions of Americans remain unaddressed. A multitude grapple with a lack of access to medical care, the prohibitive cost of essential medications, and the looming dread of medical bankruptcy. In this challenging landscape, even our disabled citizens find themselves battling to secure the benefits they are legally entitled to. This situation unveils a stark contradiction. While our resources seem limitless when it comes to funding warfare and preserving a certain status quo, attending to the common welfare of our citizenry seems to be relegated to a question of affordability. As we strive for security beyond our borders, we also need to ensure that the fight for a better life within them isn't forgotten. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. Joining us again today is attorney and former Social Security Administration employee, Spencer Bishins. He is the author of a very informative book, Social Security Disability Revealed: Why It's So Hard to Access Benefits and What You Can Do About It, and is also a Social Security and Disability consultant for the Washington Post. An SSDI consultant for the Washington Post. Spencer will be with us right in a moment, right after the break, so stay tuned.
Save America. Coup Save America. Podcast you need every week. Work you want to for latest news and understand economy and politics. This is Coup Save America.
And we are back. Folks, I do want to just quickly apologize for the technical issues that we had in our last episode. The sound was absolutely horrible. and we're working really hard to not make to not have those issues in the future. With that, my friends, I would like to bring in our guest, Mr. Bishins. Hello.
Hello, Sean. How are you?
I'm great. You've got your Sounders shirt on.
Yeah, last time I had a Mariners shirt, and I thought, you know what? This time it'll be Sounders. If you invite me back again, who knows? Maybe Kraken.
Ah, see, you're tempting me now. See, now I got to find out. I almost hope that we don't have to bring you back, given the topic that we're discussing. Hopefully you can find a different topic to specialize in, because this is just absolutely heartbreaking. We've got people waiting, and I'm going to guess more than 14 years, but in the article, one guy, the guy from Colorado, had waited 14 years to get disability payments. And, this issue, again, is very near and dear to me. And I feel almost sort of guilty that my process was so smooth. What's happening here? I don't understand why is this system so broken?
Yeah, it's a bit odd, right? Because you talked about how, you mentioned a private insurance company, right? Like if you have car insurance and you have a car accident and you file a claim, no one questions that. Why do we question it if it's a public insurance system? Still insurance. We all pay a
Right.
premium. We file a claim. Why is that different? Well, what's interesting is I love that analogy, because the Social Security Administration kind of operates like a private insurance company, doesn't it? With just the staggering level of not only how many claims it denies, but the heartlessness that it does it with. And people ask me,
Right.
why is that the case? I mean, it's the government. It's not a private insurance company. It's a government program. And that's true. It's not a private insurance company. I don't want anyone thinking oh, is this really maybe somehow been privatized? No, it is the government. It's a government program. It's run by Congress, essentially, right? But the thing is, the Social Security disability program, if you think about it, kind of has to operate like a private insurance company. And the reason is that tax that we all pay. If you look at your pay stub, on my pay stub, it said OASDI. I think that's probably how it comes out on most people's pay stubs. And that stands for Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. The problem with this program is that you pay one tax into one fund, and that covers retirement claims. Most people know what that is, right? You turn 65, 67, you file a retirement claim. Well, if you've paid into the system and earned the credits and you're at the right age, Social Security can't deny those claims, can they? That's an automatic payment. That's an automatic approval. Right. Same thing for survivor's claims. A survivor's claim, these are more rare, but a worker dies, they have minor children. The government will help take care of those minor children because the worker is no longer around to support them. Former House Speaker Paul Ryan used to talk about this, because I believe he was actually a recipient of survivor's benefits. I believe his father passed away when he was young, and he actually received Social Security benefits. And then, so that's kind of an automatic pay as well, right? Where the person dies, you have minor children, approved. So you can see where the one place where the Social Security Administration can deny people, it's disability. So if you have this fixed amount of money in a trust fund, and you have to pay these claims, and you have to pay these claims, the retirement claims, you have this, this little chunk of money for quite a large swath of claims. And that's where the Social Security Administration has to look at itself more like a private insurance company. They have to say, we have a limited amount of resources. We have a lot of people asking for them. We've got to start picking and choosing who we give this money to. And if we get less money because there's more retirees retiring in the baby boomer generation, right, or we have more applicants applying for these benefits, more applicants and less money, you can see why this is happening. So is it like something nefarious going on by the Commissioner of Social Security? I don't think so. I think it's just an agency that's underfunded and being really squeezed, and they're kind of doing the best they can, and it's not very good now, is it?
No. Now, I also mentioned. Let me ask you, if you don't know, that's fine. What happens if somebody is born disabled and are unable to work? Are they haven't paid into the system, so they're ineligible to receive benefits? Is that correct?
So there's several different kinds of claims because, of course, it's the government. Nothing is simple, right? So there's the
Right.
claim that you talked about earlier, which is SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. Think adults who work, pay the OASDI tax, pay into the system. If you become disabled, you can file a claim from that insurance program. SSDI is an insurance program. But there's actually several other different kinds of claims. One is SSI, Supplemental Security Income. This can be for either adults or children. So it's literally from birth to grave for eligibility. And this is not funded by a trust fund, right? You don't pay a tax into this specific system. SSI is just funded by general revenues. That's the government word for income taxes, right? But the principle still holds true, what you said earlier, right? If you're paying income taxes and then you need to file an SSI claim, you paid income taxes, you paid into the system. And if you didn't pay income taxes, it's probably because you can't work because you're disabled. Right. So saying, well, you didn't pay into the system, you don't deserve those benefits. Well, Congress disagrees because Congress has established the SSI program and said, we're going to have a program for people who didn't pay into the SSDI system. We believe those people are still worthy of something. And if they can prove that they're disabled, because it's all the same standard of evidence and proving you're disabled, same definition of disability, we're going to give you something to try and help you not be homeless and starve. You talked about how bad the homeless population is, and it's getting worse. So that program is also available for kids, for children. So if someone has a child and that child develops a disability, and I've seen cases where it happens at birth, and the date of onset of disability is the date of birth. There are birth defects, there's genetic conditions. Babies are born with a lung or a heart that didn't develop correctly. All kinds of things can happen in infancy, right? Or in utero. But also kids can develop a disability at age 8 or 12 or 17. So for anyone under the age of 18, there's the SSI program, and that's how kids are evaluated. But there's another program. Once those kids turn 18, they can actually file, this is a bit weird, they can file an SSDI claim, but on their parents' earnings record. And the whole point of that type of claim is, let's say you were disabled as a kid, as a young child. Maybe you never had the opportunity to work, right? So they figured out, the government came up with this program. Okay, well, we'll let you file an SSDI claim so that you can also get Medicare coverage. We'll let you do it on your parents' earnings record, parent or guardian. And there's a lot of different requirements for that. I'm not going to go into that now, but that's another something that's available, right? For a minor, but you have to be 18. So that's really more for a minor as they're approaching 18. So yeah, there's several different programs available for newborns, for adolescents, for adults, and even for people in their 70s. Because we think like, oh, once you hit 65, 67, you don't need the disability program anymore because you have the retirement program, right? What if you didn't earn enough retirement credits? What if you were a stay-at-home parent or an immigrant, or you had a disability since you were a child and you never were able to work and earn enough credits, right? So there are people who are on the SSI program well past what you and I would think of the SSDI retirement age. So yeah, Social Security's all different ages, a variety of different programs. They all have different requirements. The idea is that the government should be there for you as a safety net, whether or not you paid into the insurance program, right? But of course, as you pointed out, in practical terms, that's tough to do when you're an agency of limited resources, a growing number of applicants. It's really hard. Our system of capitalism is really hard on the American worker. And
Yeah, no kidding.
even people who are young and strong and healthy, at some point you have an illness, a sickness, an injury. And one other thing, we all are inflicted by the same medical condition. If nothing else, we all suffer from a condition called aging. And whatever age you're at, tomorrow you
Yeah.
will be one day older. And it creeps up on people, and people get sick, they get injured, they all of a sudden, it might be very sudden. For some people, it happens over time. And for other people, it's one day I could work, on Tuesday I could work, and on Wednesday I couldn't. And all of a sudden that person finds themselves now looking at potentially being a disability applicant when they never would have thought that would have been the case on Monday.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Nobody expects something like this to happen. I mean, I certainly didn't. In case if there's those listening that didn't catch our previous episode together, I loved working, and I even now feel very sort of depressed at times that that's something I'll never be able to do again, probably. And it does. I mean, this happened to me at a very young age. I never would have expected it. So it can happen to anybody, and it's funny because when it does happen to those people that are questioning whether or not this is a problem or that held these stereotypes, it's funny how quickly their perception changes, but then they too become stigmatized. I just don't. Is there not the political will to solve this problem? I mean, is it not bipartisanship?
I was talking to someone recently, and they said, I feel like age and disability are like the last two places where it's acceptable to still discriminate in the United States. It's not acceptable to discriminate in 2023 on race or gender identity or ethnicity or national origin. We wouldn't tolerate that publicly, right? But if someone's standing around in a public place, commenting on all those freeloaders stealing from taxpayers, there might be some people who don't agree, but there are going to be some people who just start nodding their heads. And it's really unfortunate because, like I just said, and as you talked about, we're all aging, and this could happen to any one of us at any time. And that's why the law requires that we all pay into the system, right? So that's a good thing. You can't opt out. Well, in limited circumstances, you can. But for 99% of us, you can't opt out of the Social Security disability system, of paying into it. You're required to pay into it. And there might be people who say something like, well, I have a 401k or I have IRAs and I'm being responsible and I'm planning for my retirement. So I shouldn't have to, I don't care. I don't want Social Security retirement. So I don't want to pay into the system. But what those people aren't factoring in is that it's also, and I would say honestly, primarily a disability system. Because retirement is something that we can all plan for. And a lot of people think like, I have 40 years, 30 years to plan for my retirement. I won't need Social Security. Okay. But the reason we're all required to pay into the system is one, maybe you're not going to be ready at retirement. We don't really know who we can trust to be ready or not ready. But the other more important factor is that you never know when you're going to become disabled. You might think I have 30 years to plan for my retirement, no problem. But if in 6 years you get injured and you can't work anymore, well, now you need disability benefits. And also your retirement plan just had a huge wrench thrown into it, didn't it? So that's why it's important that we all pay into the system. But of course, your point is then the system is supposed to be there for you, right? That's the bargain. We're told you pay into the system and it will be there if and when you need it. And the problem is someone like Emily pays into that system, is relying on that promise, and then can't work and goes to file that claim for benefits because she needs it, denial, 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 denial. Hold on, let me make sure I got this right. Denial, remand, denial. So yeah, you're talking about how like step 7, she's on, I don't know, step 7, step 8. It's absurd. It should be 1, maybe 2 steps. The way it's set up, it's just absurd.
Yeah. Well, and as you mentioned in your book, the system is really set up for people to fail, for people to
Yeah.
fall through. So let me ask you, because again, a lot of our audience may not be familiar with the intricacies of this subject.
And who is, right? Like most people
Well,
don't want
exactly.
to think about we hear about the Defense Department, which you mentioned in the news.
Right.
Members of Congress will talk about the military or maybe our national parks or, I don't know, nuclear weapons. But like nobody talks about Social Security. People in big terms talk about like, $1 trillion Social Security. But no one's talking about the nuanced intricacies of, a disability application. This is, again, that's why it's one of those things that you pay into the system and you don't want to have to think about it. You just want to know, hey, if I need it, it's there. So yeah, it's normal. If you're listening and you're a regular listener of Coup Save America and you're thinking like, I don't know a lot about Social Security. I'm a Social Security expert. I worked for the agency for almost 11 years. It's normal. You shouldn't know about Social Security, but now we're going to teach you a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, so someone finds themselves disabled. One would imagine the first step would be that they make a claim. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is mostly a legal process in many senses. At least it's certainly treated that way. Are people guaranteed a lawyer in this process? How does that usually work?
Yeah, so it is a legal process. You're dealing with a government agency, and obviously it's the Congress that sets the law, says here's the definition of disability, here's how you file a claim, here's the evidence the agency is required to consider, and then of course Social Security hires people to implement that law, right? So you're not guaranteed a lawyer. Actually, this is something a lot of people don't realize. You're not guaranteed a lawyer for any civil system anywhere in the United States.
Okay.
Unless you've been arrested and it's a criminal offense and you're facing jail time, you're not guaranteed a lawyer for anything. But I will give I'll give Congress some credit here for how they've set up representation within the Social Security Administration, because the way Congress has established the representative system, it's really good. And it's really good for the representatives, and it's really good for the people who need representatives. You may have seen an ad on TV or a billboard or a bus bench or something, right? That says like, no fee unless you win. And here's the thing, that's true. So Social Security lawyers, they're not public lawyers. They're usually private attorneys in private practice. But for most Social Security lawyers, that's all they do is Social Security. Maybe some will also do VA benefits or personal injury, but for the most part, a Social Security lawyer, like they are experts in Social Security, and that's what they do. And the way they get paid is it's a contingency. You don't pay them anything up front. They take your case, they fight for you, and if you get an approval, they get a fixed percentage or a fixed amount of the benefits that the agency is going to pay you. And it's really not that much. So the expertise that you're getting and the effort that they're going to put into your case, it is well worth the fee that they are earning by representing you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, in the article and in your book, and you've talked about this with me before, there are people that get to a certain, they get, okay, denied. Is that lawyer likely to stay with them throughout that entire process all the way up to the federal appeals?
That's a great question. And the reason it's such a great question is the answer is sometimes / it depends. There are different types of law firms and lawyers. Some lawyers will only want to handle the hearing, and they don't want to go past that. It's a volume business. They have a lot of clients. They may have a lot of hearings. They might say, look, I'm going to do everything I can, but if you lose your hearing, I can't go past that. There are other lawyers who will stay with you and go to the appeals council, or what you said. I think you called it the most unnecessary stage in the process.
Yeah.
I worked at the appeals council for 4 years, and I've got to say, Sean, I can't disagree with your assessment. And a lot of people feel the same way, because the appeals council is actually statutorily not even really part of the process. In other words, Congress has said you have the right to a hearing at the hearing level with a judge. But the appeal to the appeals council, that's by regulation. That's not in the Social Security Act. So Congress could pretty easily remove that stuff if they want to. The reason they don't is they want to give the agency one last chance before the case goes out the door to grab it and say, sorry, we did something wrong. We're going to grab it, take it back. We don't want to let it leave, right? It's a bit of a quality control thing. And some lawyers will help.
Well,
we'll come back to that. But that's the intent, right? Is they want to give the agency one last look to say, we denied a claim, or even we approved a claim. Are we sure we got that right? And a lot of lawyers will go with you to that stage.
okay.
Because it's an administrative stage, and the administrative proceedings are pretty informal. If you lose there, you get the final decision of the Commissioner of Social Security. And as you talked about, after that, if you want to keep going, you got to go sue the Commissioner of Social Security in federal court. You got to make a federal case out of it. And only some representatives will go that far. And that's just because you have to be admitted into the federal court in that jurisdiction. And you have to know the filing requirements in federal court's a very formal place. And you have to know what you're doing. And there's a lot of representatives who just say, that's just not my thing, right? I don't want to do that. But
Right.
let's say you had a representative that doesn't do that. You can go hire a different representative to take your case to federal court. That's totally okay. There's actually even some firms that's all they do are the federal court appeals. That's just what they specialize in. Just like with anything else in the economy, this industry is highly specialized. So you get people who only want to do the hearings, only want to do federal court. Some people who will do it all. It's just a thing to ask when you're interviewing representatives. Like, what happens if I lose? Don't be afraid to ask that. Because as you talked about, statistically, you might lose. It's a good idea to know, should that happen, what will happen? I want to be prepared. I want to know if you, potential representative, will stick with me. And if not, do you work with someone else? Maybe Joe won't stick with me, but he sends the cases over to a partner law firm, Bill, and Bill will go to federal court. And then if it gets remanded, it goes back to Joe and they work together, right? It's a totally acceptable system. So it's just the kind of thing that you just need to ask a prospective representative and interview several different representatives and pick the person you're most comfortable with.
Now, there's a lot of people, though, that don't have an attorney, especially at the federal level.
Yeah.
Is it because attorneys that specialize in that are hesitant to take cases where there's been repeated denials?
Well, there's a couple
that's
different.
kind of all they do. So
Yeah, there's a couple different kinds of lawyers or representatives, which can be attorneys or non-attorneys. Some attorneys will just take any case that comes in the office. And the thing is, they're not going to tell you what kind they are, right? But some attorneys will take any case that comes in the office. And their thinking is this is a numbers game. So the more cases I take, you mentioned that at the hearing level, about half the cases are approved. So they're thinking for every 2 cases I take, on average, I'll win 1. Doesn't really matter how good the evidence is. I'm just playing the odds. There are some representatives who play it that way. There's other representatives who say, no, I don't want to spend time on a case, hours developing the medical record, preparing my client to testify, going to the hearing, and then it's a denial. So there's some other representatives who will be a lot more selective. And they may sit down with you and say, I'm sorry, Sean, I just can't take your case. And you say, why? And you say, it's not that I don't believe you. It's that the standard is really high and I just don't think you're going to be approved. And if you're not going to be approved, I'm not going to get a fee, right? Because the fee is only if you win. So I'm sorry, there's other lawyers who will take your case, but it's just not going to be me. And it's okay. It's private practice, right? They're private citizens in a private law firm, and this is a profession, and they're doing it to get paid. So if they think you can't win, there's a lot of lawyers who will just tell you that. And the other thing is they may be trying to also temper your expectations as the client, right? To say, look, I'm really sorry about your circumstances. This is a real shame, but I just want you to know the reality of how the Social Security Administration system works, and the stats and the likelihood, especially if you're under 50 or considered a younger individual under the law, they might say, you're welcome to go find another representative to take your case, but I just want you to understand you may not be approved, and you, the client, you need to understand that and plan for that and prepare for that. So, different approaches from different attorneys or different non-attorney representatives. There's not one that's right or wrong. And that's why you got to interview a few different people. Whatever city you're at across the country, interview several different people and pick the person who you're most comfortable with. And just for full disclosure for your audience, I don't take cases. I'm not a Social Security representative. So this isn't me like selling my services to your audience.
Right.
I recommend in my book that people go find a representative in your local community. If you live in Oakland, California, or in Northern California, go sit down and talk with someone in Oakland or San Francisco or Fresno. If you live in, Kentucky or Ohio, there's a hearing office in Cincinnati. There's one in Columbus. There's a hearing office in every major or moderate-sized city across the country. And clustered around every hearing office are a bunch of law firms that specialize in Social Security disability. Go sit down with a few different people and talk to them. And, it's just like hiring anything else, hiring a plumber, hiring an accountant, picking what airline you're going to fly. Although maybe that's like, which is the least bad one, right? But yeah, you gotta say like, I've interviewed Tom, Joe, Mary, and Annette, and I just kind of know Annette's the person I'm most comfortable with. And, and then you can talk to that person about how they get paid and what happens if you need to appeal and how they're going to get your medical records and what's going to happen at the hearing and all that.
Now, we hear a lot in the article, and again, you've dove into this as well, that a lot of people just give up because they don't have the resources to continue.
Yeah.
If they can get an attorney, what are the resources that they find beyond their reach?
Well, there's not going to be a whole lot of additional resources just because you find a representative. One of the reasons, as you mentioned, that a lot of people give up is the system's kind of designed that way. So you talked about how at the hearing level, 50% of people are approved, right? And that means 50% of people are denied on average, rough statistics. But that's 50% of people who make it to that stage. That's not 50% of everyone who applied. There's a lot of people who are applied and get approved initially, but there's a lot of people who apply, get denied, don't appeal to the reconsideration stage, or they do that first appeal and lose, and they don't appeal to the hearing level. It's 3 to 6 months to go between that initial and reconsideration, those first two levels. It may be another year, 18 months before you get to the hearing level. A lot of people, like, the rent is due on the first. A lot of people just can't do that. And so even if they can't go back to work full time, some people do. And if you're thinking like, oh, see, I knew they could. No. What I'm saying is there are people who can't physically and mentally and shouldn't, but they do anyway because they feel like they don't have a choice. And those people tend to just medically, they get worse. They may develop additional impairments, additional symptoms. And a lot of people, sometimes people just die. People who, if they were allowed to not work and approved for disability, maybe they would have survived, gotten some treatment, got back into the workforce and paid taxes for the next 25 years. But instead they're denied. They don't want to be on the streets. They got to pay that rent on the first of the month. So they go get a job, and when that happens, I've seen these stories. Health declines really, really fast, and from a really bad place too, right? When you're in a really
Yeah.
bad place and then you decline quickly, some of those people within months pass away. And then, you have their relatives going to before the judge at the hearing, and the judge says, I'm sorry for your loss. But, it's not the judge's fault, right? But the system, it kind of pushes that scenario to occur when you deny people, and then you don't let them go to a hearing, and you make them wait. And so all those people that, drop out of the system, they decide not to appeal. They feel like they have to go back to work. Some people want to appeal and they just miss the deadline. You get 60 days. You don't appeal within 60 days, you are cut off. For the next appeal, it's another 60 days. And then if you miss that, boom, cut off. So there's all kinds of reasons why someone doesn't even make it to the hearing. So if you take that 50% statistic and you think about all those people who didn't even make it to that hearing level, actually the approval, if you think about it, it's a lot lower than 50%, isn't it?
Right. And I imagine too that during the process of applying for Social Security, you're probably not going to be working. You probably can't be working. Is that correct?
You can work while you're an applicant, and you can work while you're standing in front of the judge, and you can work while, I don't know if you heard that, but that was loud. There's some thunder behind
That
me.
was thunder. Wow.
Yeah, Washington, y'all should be used to that, right?
Yes.
So you can work while you're an applicant, while you're at your hearing, while you're receiving benefits, you can work. You were talking earlier about how there's this misconception that people think people are defrauding the system. One of the most common things is my neighbor Bill, I know he's applying for Social Security. I've heard him talk about it, and I've seen a letter in the mail, in his mailbox. And I saw him go to work today. Obviously, it's fraud, but you're allowed to work. The law lets you work. Congress passed the law called the Social Security Act, and that law says you can work. Now, there's a limit to how much you can work. It's a limited amount. In 2022, when I wrote the book, it was $1,350 per month. I looked it up recently. I think it's $1,470 per month this year in 2023. Obviously, that number goes up every year, right? Because of inflation.
Right.
But that means, if you're earning $15 an hour and the limit's almost $1,500, that means you could work did I do the math right there? Almost 100 hours in a month in theory. And of course, if you're earning more, it's fewer hours to get to that point. But yeah, you can work and you can earn up to that level set in the law, and it doesn't impact your claim in any way. In fact, that's the first question in a Social Security disability claim is the person earning at the substantial gainful activity level? And you could say, nope, I am working and I am earning $1,400 per month, Judge. And the judge will say, okay, the answer is no. We'll move on. Well, let's talk about your medical conditions now. So people think they have to hide work or they have to work under the table. That's not true. That's why it's great to read my book, of course, but that's why it's great to talk to a representative. So you know the actual law, not like what your brother-in-law thought was the law when you were talking to him at Thanksgiving.
Now, if you get approved for Social Security, are you still able to work?
Yeah, so it does change a little bit because once you're approved, you can work, but if it's SSI, and that's the program that we talked about earlier, that's not the earned benefit, right? That's funded just by regular income taxes. So because that's a program that's not an earned benefit, it's not an entitlement, there are a lot more restrictions with SSI. There are asset and income limitations. The idea being, of course, I don't like the word welfare, but if someone were to ever use that word, this is more the program that they're talking about. And so there's asset and income limitations. So where the government says, look, we're going to help you out with SSI, but if you start earning money and you earn too much, we're going to offset your benefits. So there is an offset with SSI. So with SSI, you got to be really, really careful about work. Not that you shouldn't go back to work. You just have to know the rules, right? With SSDI, you can work, but there's a different set of rules. And the reason is there's what's called a trial work period, which is actually a fantastic thing. Because as you and I both know, most people receiving SSDI used to work. That's how they earn the credits, right? They
Right.
want to work and they don't want to be receiving benefits the rest of their lives. They want to go and they want to work and they want to feel like they're contributing to society. It's everything you talked about. So the government actually has this program. Congress has established a program where you can work and receive benefits at the same time. And the idea is they want to encourage you to go back to work. And if you just cut people off, you'd probably have people who say, like, if I go back to work, I lose my benefits and I need to pay the rent on the first. So I can't do that. So the government says, okay, we're going to give you 9 months where you can work and also we'll pay you benefits, right? So it's a transitional period to transition you out of the SSDI program. And it's a fantastic thing. And so many SSDI recipients utilize this program, as they should, to transition themselves out of the SSDI program. So, you know, I go back to work for up to 9 months. I'm getting benefits and also working. And then that tells me, like, okay, I have that much time to make sure that I can sustain full-time work. And then I say to the government, I'm good to go now. Thank you for the benefits. I really appreciate it. I'm good to go. The government says, fantastic. We're still going to give you 2 additional months of benefits. And then your SSDI is done. Best of luck to you. Thank you for going back to being a taxpayer. And let's say you're not successful. Let's say you work for a few months and your medical conditions prevent you from continuing. That's the whole point of a trial work program. It was a trial. If you can't do it, no problem. You stay on your benefits. And of course, this is all done, like you said, under the watchful eye of the Social Security Administration. They're keeping an eye on you. You're reporting that you're working. They're evaluating that. They're seeing if you can continue. If you can't say, I'm sorry, I can continue, they might say, can you show us medical documentation as to why that was the case? They want you to be able to go back to work. So they want you to try working. So they let you do it. So yes, you can work as an applicant to a limited extent. You can work as a recipient of benefits to a limited extent. You just have to know those rules. And a lot of Social Security disability insurance recipients, such as yourself, probably know those rules extremely well, and you know exactly what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do under the law, right? It's not what that nosy neighbor thinks, where you're breaking the law. You're working within the bounds of the law as it was established by Congress, as you should. You're allowed to do it.
Is the issue, so we talked about how Social Security disability is funded, and we talked about the lack of funding that they have at that level. So why, and again, I understand the complexities with Congress and the partisanship and the problems with that. I get it.
If anyone gets it, it would be you, Sean, right?
Why? It seems as though the solution to this is just to add more funding to the system.
Isn't that the solution for everything within the government?
Pretty well, except for the military. We need to tone it down on the military, but that's a solution, is it not?
Here's the thing with funding, and I'm hoping this answers your question. And I want to take the military as an example, because like the defense budget's like what, almost $1 trillion, you said, like $800 billion or something. And a lot of people, when they think about that, they think like, oh yeah, but I want the troops to get paid. They imagine, an American soldier wearing fatigues overseas, fighting for their country. And yes, of course, we have members of the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, which is, I know, not Defense Department anymore, but Homeland Security, stationed all over the world. But actually, a lot of those people who actually wear the uniform and get deployed for a year at a time, they actually don't make all that much money. A lot of that money goes to defense contractors. A lot of them are in Northern Virginia. And there's a lot of really tall buildings and a lot of really fancy cars in Northern Virginia. If you're ever visiting Washington, D.C., go over to Arlington, not the cemetery, the city of Arlington, and just walk around. You see a lot of Mercedes, a lot of Teslas, there's a lot of money, and a lot of that money, it's not the government employees so much, the civil servants who are, they're doing
Right.
okay, $70,000-$80,000 a year, but those government contractors, defense contractors, they may have salaries of $500,000 a year, and that's not paying for like the missiles, that's paying the people, right? So
Right.
a lot of that, we know the old adage of like the $10,000 hammer and the $20,000 toilet seat, right?
Right.
And it's not literally that, but that's effectively what we're doing. Is we have a lot of government contractors who they got no bid contracts. Maybe they're the only contractor who makes this particular software or weapon system or whatever. So when they sell it to the government, they can sell it at a premium. And I'm not saying, if someone does that hard work of developing something new, I'm not saying they shouldn't be rewarded for it, but it's important to know that's where a lot of that money goes. Contrast that with Social Security, disability specifically. When you pay someone Social Security disability benefits, you talked about how most people are getting less than $2,000 a month. That money is not going into savings. It's not going into a 401k. It's not, going into the stock market. It's paying the rent.
Right.
It's going to the grocery store. It's going to the doctor's office. It's going straight into the economy. All of it. Nearly 100% of all of those benefits goes immediately back into the economy and circulates. Whereas, a lot of that Defense Department money is going to buy that second house in Aspen or the Bahamas. So if we want, money to have an immediate effect, to be a really good investment, we should be investing in programs that, first of all, invest in the American worker.
Right.
Like
exactly.
Like there are statistics that have been shown that for every dollar that you put into the American worker, and I'm talking about education, training, healthcare, but also Social Security benefits, so that worker can get better, can get their medical treatment they need by getting Medicare benefits, can go to physical therapy, occupational therapy, just mental health therapy if it's a mental health thing. They can get better and go back to work. If you have a 44-year-old person who has to stop working due to a disability, the person doesn't want to be on benefits for 23 years. Let them be out of work for 3 years. Give them the support they need so that if 3 years later they can go back to work at age 67, they're going to go back to work and pay taxes for another 20 years until they hit retirement age, right? You just invested in the American worker, and that's like a 700 or 800% return. So like for every dollar we put into that system, we get $7 or $8 of value back over time. Versus
Absolutely.
a missile system where maybe we buy missiles or software or something. And yes, it's important that we defend the country, but a lot of that just kind of is there for just in case purposes. And I think what you're alluding to is maybe we could spend a little bit less money and still be completely prepared and take some of that money that we're spending on missiles and bombs and really not even on missiles and bombs. We're really just spending it on like just in case, right? It's kind of insurance.
Yeah.
It's insurance for the country. Well, let's take that money and go spend it on the insurance program that workers who can't work because of an illness or injury are telling you they need benefits from. Go put it into that insurance program that's woefully underfunded, that's got a lot of people who need it. Support those workers, get those workers back into the economy.
And another thing too, and I mentioned this in the monologue, is that the amount of money that you get from Social Security disability, I think it said that the average was, what was it, $2,000 a month?
I think it's
something
less.
like that.
I think the average is less than that. It's not much. $1,500 a month, maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
Which
you
really
can't survive on that.
is nothing. Yeah. You were talking about how it barely keeps you above the poverty line. I don't even know if that's true. I'm not even sure it keeps you above the poverty line. I guess it all depends on, like where you live, right? Because that's different in Manhattan than it is in Oklahoma. But also, if you have kids and what kind of house you have, and everyone's life circumstances are different. But if you just think about like and I talk about this in the book, a super modest 800 square foot home or 2-bedroom apartment, $700-800 of rent. Let's say you have 2 or 3 people living in the household. So you're spending, I don't know, at least $600 probably on food. There's your $1,400. And, that's not medical care, gas for the car, transportation, every other bill. So I've talked to some Social Security recipients. I've not talked to one yet who is receiving enough in benefits to cover their costs. I think that's just the reality. And so, that's one of those things where people who don't understand the system think like, this is a windfall. But it's not really a windfall, because when you factor in your housing, your food, all your medical needs, your costs I'm not going to say every circumstance, but in the circumstances of so many people who are disabled around the United States, their costs are just more than they're getting in benefits. So when it's a negative return on investment, there's no incentive for fraud.
Yeah, no, and it's just disheartening to see that there are people. I mean, there's just a report issued. They issue this report every year, and I it's on the tip of my tongue. But essentially, it goes through every state, and I think it even breaks it down by city, and it talks about the cost of living in that city. And there's nowhere except for Puerto Rico, that being the exception, where you can even. It's mainly about housing. It looks at the amount of money that you spend on housing, and it determined that in most cities, you need to be making $30 an hour to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah,
and you contrast that with Social Security benefits. I mean, do you know any statistics on how many Social Security beneficiaries are homeless?
I don't. But what I wanted to say is this statistic is a couple of years old, but I remember this really clearly. I was watching an episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, and he had an expert on who said that across the United States, in order to have like the average middle class lifestyle, with everything that means as a lifestyle, you need to earn like $120,000 a year household income, which is like double the median in the United States. So, when you're seeing, your neighbors and your friends and your family and people at church and at the grocery store, and you see, that car that people have, and people talk about their kids and playing this instrument or going to soccer camp, that average middle class lifestyle is so far outside of the reach of most Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why people borrow, right? That's why the U.S. has such a consumer debt problem. And so when someone becomes disabled and unable to work, I feel like sometimes there's just a lack of critical thinking on behalf of the critics of the Social Security disability program or Social Security recipients. Like, okay, let's say I'm struggling financially. How does not being able to work and getting Social Security benefits, like, that's not going to change that. It's only going to make it worse. And as you said, a lot of people, it gets so bad that they unfortunately fall into homelessness. I don't remember the name of this documentary, but I saw a really good documentary sometime in the last couple of years about homelessness. And this is something I hadn't realized, but there's actually really two different, very distinct kinds of homelessness: temporary and more long-term. And a lot of homelessness is temporary, where someone who's like, if you don't have a home and you're crashing on someone's couch or sleeping in your car, you're considered homeless. But actually, if you can get those people really early on, right before it becomes a cycle, before they fall into that cycle, if you can catch them within that first 30 days or first 60 days of homelessness, you can turn things around. If you could get them services, public benefits, if they can't work and that's why they're homeless, and you can get them Social Security disability benefits, you can really prevent a lot of people, a substantial number of people, from falling into that more long-term category. Because the statistics, once you fall into that long-term homelessness category,
Oh yeah.
the likelihood of you ever getting out of it is really low. And it's not because people are on drugs. It's not because of mental health. And of course, there's a correlation, right? A lot of people who are homeless, there are people have a drug problem, which is a health condition, and drug addiction is a health condition, right, or other health conditions, whether that be mental health or physical. But really, it's just because people lose hope. Once hopelessness sets in, once you get used to living on the street, you just think like, I'm never going to not be homeless. And that's why it's really important to understand these distinctive types of homelessness, and you try and get people,
right,
while they're still willing to accept services and to try and get out of that situation that they're in. But it's important that we have services to give them. And while there are a lot of nonprofits and a lot of people who are really dedicated to this and who really want to try and help people to get out of homelessness, the dollars have to be there. And if the Social Security Administration is going to deny 7 out of every 10 claims at the initial level, to me, that's saying there's not a willingness to put those public benefits front and center to help people from prevent people from falling into that long-term homelessness category.
You know, and I just want to really quickly mention your book again, and I want to just address the audience listening. You know, you may not be in a position where you feel as though this is a book that you need to read, but much like an insurance policy, you are paying into this insurance system, and you should know how it works. And whether or not you're facing disability, this is a book that really it goes way beyond the process of just going through the process of actually applying for disability. And so I really encourage you to read this book. Just because, do we have the cover image that we can throw up real quick? My producer's going to kill me. There we go.
Hey, look at that.
Social Security Disability Revealed, Why It's So Hard to Access Benefits and What You Can Do About It.
Oh,
and the reason I wanted to pause here and, Hey, yeah. Oh, yep. Right there.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think that this book is important for people to read is because, as I said, you're paying into the system. You may very well need it at some point. You don't know. And as someone who's gone through this process, let me just tell you, it helps a great deal. This book, if I had known about it at the time I was going through this, would have been a huge benefit to get into that process. So knowledge ahead of time is crucial. With that said, Spencer, what has changed since you've written the book? And you just also had we'll talk about this at the end of the episode, your audiobook.
Yeah.
But has anything it seems like things have gotten worse even since you've written the book.
I don't know if they've gotten worse. The thing is, we're in this weird time as far as Social Security is concerned, where we have the largest generation in American history. And when I was working in the Social Security Administration, the baby boomer generation, they were in their 50s. So we saw a spike in disability applications because they were aging, but not quite at retirement age. Then, as that population has hit retirement age, has hit 62, 65, 67, the disability filings have gone down, but the retirement filings are going up, right? We talked earlier about how the more and more people filing for retirement, that's squeezing the disability system. And it's not just that the baby boomer generation is filing for retirement. It's 2023. We have really good healthcare, right? And all these people are on Medicare because they're over 65. The baby boomer generation could live to 80, 85, 90. So we have a lot of people collecting a lot of benefits potentially for quite a long period of time. So, that's obviously that's a slow change. But if we want to think about why are things like not headed in the right direction for the disability system, this is a guess, right? I don't know, but I think this is to some extent what's happening, and this is not going to get better anytime soon. Until that baby boomer generation, this sounds morbid, right? But this is just it's math, and this is how Social Security works. Once you die, you stop collecting benefits. Until that generation starts dying out and the number of retirement recipients comes down to free up some more benefits for the disability applicants, unfortunately, or unless Congress says, okay, we've got a problem, we've got to seriously increase the influx of money. So we're going to raise the income cap for the tax from, say, 145,000 to 250,000, right? We're just going to flush the system with cash through increase in taxes so that we can start paying more claims. Unless you have more money coming in or less money going out, you got a fixed amount of resources. And we talked about how.
Now, let me ask you: Have you contacted? Because I know that Congress wants to solve this problem, right? Have you contacted them and said, "Hey, here's what you need to do"?
Why do we think Congress wants to solve this problem? Quite honestly,
exactly.
Right? Like we talked. The reason I mentioned the defense contractors earlier is there's a substantial amount of money that goes to the defense contractors, so that there's a lot of lobbying, right? And there's a lot of money going into supporting members of Congress. It's a feedback loop. People who are living on the edge of poverty, people who are disabled and unable to work, they don't contribute to congressional campaigns, right? There's no lobbyists for the disabled community. Right now, we're in the midst of several large collective actions in the movie industry, in the auto industry, at UPS. Collective bargaining, right? Where a lot of people get together and they can make their voice heard. There's no union for the disabled community. Everyone's kind of on their own and everyone feels a bit powerless. So I've sent my book to a lot of members of Congress, to the people in charge of the congressional committees that deal with Social Security funding. I've sent my book to several prominent Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate. I have thus far had zero responses. Not a single member of Congress or anyone on their staff has contacted me. So I really, truly believe people like Lisa Rain at the Washington Post care. She's written a lot of articles about different areas of the government, a lot on Social Security. She very clearly cares about making sure that people understand what's happening. And her article and your analysis of that article were really highly factually accurate. So she knows what she's doing from a reporting standpoint. But as far as members of Congress, I don't know. I don't see the evidence to tell me that Congress actually wants to fix this system. They call it the third rail of politics for a reason, right? Whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're from Alabama or the state of Washington, there's just not a lot of collective desire on Capitol Hill to really do anything about Social Security. It's there, it exists. Let's not talk about it because we don't want to offend our voters. We don't want to offend the people on the right who say this is fraud and there's too much money going into the system. We don't want to offend the people on the left who say, we need more money going into the system. You're not taking care of people properly. So if you're a member of Congress, whatever state you're from, whichever party you're from, you risk really alienating a lot of people in your district or in your state if you even talk about this program. So if it were me, I would say, I don't care about getting reelected. Let's talk about what's important to talk about, right? That's why you elected me to Congress. And there are some members of Congress, to their credit, who don't want to sweep these things under the rug. Like Representative Cortez from New York, right? She talks about this sort of thing. She gives interviews. She talks about it on the House floor. She will say, we are not doing enough for the hardworking Americans. Before she was a member of Congress, I think she was a bartender. She didn't earn very much money. So she knows what it's like to work a real job and to work for a living. And unfortunately, I
Right.
think maybe a lot of members of Congress don't know what it's like to work for a living. And so it's hard for them to sympathize and empathize with hardworking Americans who they talk about all the time, but maybe they don't really know what that means. And of course, to then empathize with people who can't work, want to work, really want to work, but can't work through no fault of their own. So change at the federal level, change within Congress, or even with the higher management of the Social Security Administration, I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, I'll tell you, from what I've seen of Congress, let me just say, if you're disabled and you can't work and you can't get Social Security, it seems like you can become a politician and do a much better job than these people are doing right now. Because, I mean, it really comes down to as you said, corruption. I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, lobbying is essentially a corrupt practice. I mean, the funding of political campaigns is a corrupt practice because it has a huge influence on the way that representative of Congress is going to advocate for their constituents.
I see, Sean. I don't feel like it's corruption. Just like how we talked about how the Social Security system, like you don't get denied by accident. The system is very much designed for them to be
Right.
able to deny claims. I don't think it's corruption. I think this is exactly how the system was designed. You know, that First Amendment has been there since 1789, passed by the very first Congress. Campaigns, elections every 2 years. That system was designed by the founders of the United States. We're always in an election cycle. Politicians always are raising money. They are going to help the people who help them. And that's really the history of our republic. So I don't see that so much as corruption as, well, institutionalized corruption. But
Yeah.
that's our country. That's how our country was designed. That's how Congress was designed. The free speech is in the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court has said money equals speech. If you want to go put as much money as you can into supporting congressional candidates or people for president, that's you delivering your speech and saying who you believe should be elected. So, like, we all like to think we're equal, right? Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," but it wasn't true then.
With,
and it ain't
with a
true now.
footnote.
Yeah, it wasn't true then, and it ain't true now. The more money you have to donate to members of Congress, the more equal you are.
Yeah, and again, therein lies the problem with so many of the issues that we have in our society. Is it ultimately comes down to almost an oligarchy where we're living in, where the people that have the most money have the most influence.
It's an unfortunate system, but I don't want to be too much of a downer here, right? I don't want your audience to walk away thinking like, man, this guy's got all bad news, and this podcast is just like telling me why my country sucks so badly. I'm done with these people. It's not all bad news, right? And that's why I wrote the book. The subtitle of my book is Why It's So Hard to Access Benefits and what you can do about it. Because as you talk about with a lot of the topics that you discuss, yeah, there's some problems, but there's also solutions, right? And here's the thing. You can't wait for Congress to solve this problem for you. You can write to your member of Congress. You can yell at them during a town hall, but they're just going to point that finger of blame at their 534 colleagues and the guy in the White House, and they're not going to do anything to help you. So what can you do? You can educate yourself on all government programs, really. But of course, here we're talking about Social Security. I pay this tax. I pay into the system. What am I paying for? Learn about what you're paying for. Learn about why it's important. Learn about where that tax money goes, how those disability claims are decided. You said like, well, why do you need to know about this? You might feel like, I'm not disabled. I can work. I don't need to know any of this. But just because you're not disabled today doesn't mean you're not going to develop some sort of medical condition or injury tomorrow.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many claims I saw where you had a perfectly healthy person in their 30s working in a warehouse. So many cases where people were working in warehouses. It's got to be the most dangerous work environment on the planet. And something just falls on them. A box, a refrigerator, a forklift, things just fall on people all the time in warehouses. Boom, and that's it. They call an ambulance, they get taken to the hospital, they get x-rays, they get surgery, they can't work anymore, and they're in their 30s. And like I said, Tuesday they had an injury, Wednesday they can't work, Monday they would have sworn that would never be them. And then it was. It can happen very suddenly. People get diagnosed with all sorts of things at all sorts of ages all across the country. But even if it's not you, I wrote this book so that you could read this and help out a friend, a family member. If you're a caregiver, if you're a social worker, you want to know what your clients are going through. I did a podcast once with a doctor, and I talked to him, and I said, did they ever teach you in medical school, like how your patients have to deal with the world and the things they have to do to like get public benefits? He's like, no, they don't tell us any of that. We get taught how to treat them and street them, right? How to treat someone, document the chart, bill the insurance company, and send them on their way. But if you're a doctor, you need to know how this system works, because you need to know what your patients are going through, why they're coming to you with the form and asking you to fill it out, and what you can do in that form if you actually want to help them. Because writing "my patient is disabled" will not help them. So, and one other thing I want to say is, one thing I had no idea about when I started with the Social Security, but I learned over my 11 years with the agency, is that everyone knows someone who is disabled or an applicant for disability. You may not think you know someone who is an applicant or a recipient of benefits, but you do. The reason you think you don't is because people who are applicants and recipients, as you know, Sean, don't like to advertise it. And you can't look at someone and know if they're receiving disability benefits. If I see someone using a wheelchair, that person could be a lawyer or an accountant or a motivational speaker and make 500 grand a year and make too much money to get disability. Or I could see someone who looks like they're, perfectly healthy guy in his early 20s, built guy wearing an army shirt in the grocery store, and he may be receiving benefits because he's got really bad PTSD and anxiety. And every time he turns the aisle in that grocery store, he gets this wave of trauma and exhaustion because he doesn't know who's around the corner. Right? So you just can't tell by looking someone if they're a claimant or not, if they've ever applied or not. You just don't know. It might be someone, one of your kids' friends' parents. It might be someone at church. It might be your neighbor. You don't know, but I promise you know someone who has gone through this system before or is going through it now. And if you read this book, you'll better understand what that person's going through. And then at some point, if it slips out that they're, or they tell you, they say, Frank, you may not know this about me, but I actually have been receiving disability benefits for about 2 years now. I'd love to talk to you, sit down and have coffee and talk to you about it if you want. When that happens, you'll know what that person went through, what they're currently going through. You'll know how they're stigmatized. You'll know why they were denied so many times. You'll understand why all those claims of fraud, waste, and abuse and deception are total nonsense. So yeah, I wrote this book not only for people who are applying, but I kind of wrote it for everyone. Everyone will read this and see something different. If you're a recipient or an applicant, you might see it differently. If you're just someone who cares about your fellow American and fellow human being, or just cares as a taxpayer and wants to know what's going on within the government, you might skip over the parts that are like, here's exactly what evidence you need. But you're going to find some benefits of this book. And my hope is that whatever your purpose reading it, you'll have learned something and you'll have a greater appreciation for the disabled community.
Yeah. And if we can put the book cover up just one more time, well, not necessarily the one more time, but
I'll I'll move over
speak
here.
up
There
into
we
the
go.
viewer.
Perfect.
There we go. Social Security disability revealed, why it's so hard to access benefits, and what you can do about it. Spencer Bishins is with us. The author of the book is also an attorney. He used to work for Social Security Administration, in case you've just been tuning in. And let me ask you, just even when someone gets approved, let's say someone goes through all of the steps, right? They get to the federal appeals court and they get approved.
Yep.
That's not the end of the process, right? I mean, they could be randomly picked for a review at any point in time. Is that also a situation where they're encouraged, is like, oh, hey, you know, every case that we get, we want to try to get this person off? Does that happen, or is it a little bit less?
Yeah. So the thing is, the government, I don't think the government is trying to get anyone off. I truly believe, when it comes to CDRs, continuing disability reviews, this is something Congress has set up by necessity, really, right? Because we don't want people to be on benefits forever. We don't want anyone to feel like it's permanent. We don't want the taxpayers to think that that's what's happening, right? People feel better about paying into a system where people are receiving these benefits if they know, hey, you know, this is kind of intended to be temporary. This program is really intended to be a temporary program, temporary assistance. It doesn't have that in the name, but Social Security disability benefits, it's intended to be temporary while you are disabled. And for some people, their disabilities will be permanent or long-term. And, you know, it depends on the kind of disability. If you have a broken bone and had surgery, agency's not going to look at that as permanent, right? But something like
Right.
Down syndrome, or if you've been paralyzed, or inoperable cancer, there are certain things where the government's going to look at this and say, we understand this person is never going to improve. They may choose to never review that case again because they know there's no point. Why are they going to waste their resources when they know that person is telling the truth, isn't lying, had good documentation, and it's permanent? They just say, you know what, it's permanent. We believe you. But for most people, that's not going to be the case. If it's a heart condition or a breathing disorder or anxiety, depression, PTSD, for most things, there's treatment available, right? And so the government doesn't make any assumptions. They don't presume you're going to be able to go back to work, but they say you might be able to go back to work. And so the way they do these CDRs, it's based on the type of impairment, but it's also based on age. So if someone is fairly young, like you and I'm going to go ahead and say that we're fairly young, and the law describes a younger individual, someone under the age of 50. So if you have someone that's in their 20s or 30s or even 40s, that person, if it's not a permanent impairment, is probably going to have their case reviewed again by Social Security. And it's not a surprise, right? They say, keep all your medical records, keep getting treatment. If you weren't able to get treatment, now we're going to give you benefits and Medicare coverage. Please go and get treatment so that you can improve and go back. Try someday, maybe, to go back to work. And we'll review your case in a couple years. And they might even tell you, they'll say 1 year, or they'll say, look, we're not going to review your case for the next 3 years. But keep all your records because we're going to come back. But for the next 3 years, you're good. And then 3 years or 4 or 5 years later, they come back to you and they say, okay, we told you we were coming back to talk to you. We're back. We want to see all your records. We want notes from your doctors. We're going to contact your doctors. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what's happened in the last few years. We got you the benefits you needed. Tell us what's going on. Have you tried to go back to work? Do you think you can go back to work? Has your situation gotten worse? Because that happens too, right? And so the agency does this assessment and they think if you can go back to work. And for some people, they decide, okay, medically you've improved. You can go back to work now. Based on medical improvement, you're no longer disabled. For other people, they've gone back to work, right? Some people just get better and they go back because they don't want to be on benefits. So they go back to work and the agency says, great, you went back to work. Fantastic. We'll stop your SSDI. Best of luck to you. And other people don't improve. And the agency says, we find that you remain disabled. We're sorry to hear that. We'll circle back with you 3 years from now. But as you age, as people get into their 50s or early 60s, closer to retirement age, the likelihood that the agency is going to do one of these continuing reviews, it gets much lower, right? Because if you're 62, why are we going to review your case? It's only 5 years of benefits potentially till you have full retirement age. We'd rather spend those resources and do that review on a 45-year-old or a 42-year-old, not on a 62-year-old. So it's based on the type of impairment, what's happened with your circumstances, and also your age. But yes, people should know the agency doesn't just approve a 25-year-old and that's it. They are going to stay on top of that person, and they're going to make sure that person is only getting benefits if they continue to meet the requirements, the very strict requirements of the Social Security Act.
Wow. I feel like there's so much more to cover. Unfortunately, I think we're running out of time. Is there anything else that you think is important that I haven't gotten to yet that people need to know?
The thing is, the one thing we all want to think about is like, what could be done to improve this process? And we touched about that a little bit, right? Like, how can we make this process go more smoothly? And like I talked about, it's not going to come from Congress, and it's not going to come from Social Security. Someone said to me once, like, well, why do I need your book? Everything I need to know is on the Social Security website. The Social Security website is going to tell you, like, they're going to tell you the law and the very basics of the process. They're not going to tell you how things actually work. So, like, how can you make things go more smoothly for you or your family member or your loved one or your client? Obviously, I go into a lot more detail in the book, but just like in a couple sentences here, educate yourself on the system. Know what's going on, what's going to happen, what kind of evidence you need, where to get that evidence, how to talk to your doctor, because the doctor probably doesn't know. You need to know. You need to take this into your own hands and advocate for yourself. Or if the claimant can't advocate for themselves and you're a friend or family member or advocate, you need to try and be that voice. And of course, get a representative. The representative, you won't pay anything up front. They're well worth their fee that they earn.
Right.
Remember, they're earning that fee by helping you get your benefits. So I see it as like, it's a stool with 3 legs. And if any of these legs fall, you got a problem. You got the claimant has to take some responsibility. A representative has to also take some responsibility and help that person get their benefits. But the third leg of the stool is someone else, a third person. Could be a spouse, could be a parent or child, could be a good friend, just some other third person who says, I'm here to help you. I may not be the expert, but I'm going to read the book. I'm going to try and become as much of an expert as I can. I'm going to go with you to your doctor's appointments. I'm going to be someone to bounce ideas off of. I'm going to say, hey, do you think maybe you should go get that test? Or, hey, I read about this.
Right.
Maybe you should consider going and seeing this type of specialist. So yeah, the claimant has to be involved as much as they can be. The representative, you need a good, high quality, professional, knowledgeable representative, and they are well worth their fee. And then that third person, that third brain, and go with the claimant to see the lawyer. Sit down and the 3 of you brainstorm with each other strategy. Like, what's the best way to get through this? What's the best argument to make to the Social Security Administration? Hey, we're going to a hearing. What's going to happen at that hearing? And what's the best way to put forth our case to the judge? And the 3 of you work together to put forth the best possible case so you can have the best possible chance at success. I feel like, if Congress isn't going to help you and you got to do it on your own, that's, I think, the winning formula. And that's the best way to kind of streamline the system and give yourself the best chance at winning at each stage of the process. And you might lose, and you might have to appeal, and you might lose, and you might have to go to a hearing, and you might lose again, and you might lose again, and you might lose again. But, take Emily's case as an example. She's not giving up. She's not going to take no for an answer because the judge's decisions have been faulty and unsupported. And 2 U.S. district judges now have said to the Social Security Administrative Law Judge, no, you did it wrong. Your decision was bad. It wasn't supported by the evidence. You're going to do it again, and we're not letting you get away with this. And that's the thing, is when you have a team surrounding you, a team there to help you, you have a support system. And a lot of people don't, and I recognize that. But if you can put a support system together, you're going to really be able to fight through those denials and make sure that you get those appeals in on time. and keep fighting for your benefits, because no one else is going to do that for you.
Absolutely. And again, the book is, I would encourage everybody to buy the book. Again, as an insurance, just so that you know what the system is, because the chances of you knowing somebody or going through this yourself are very high. And as Spencer said, and also, for those of you that are listening, I know a lot of you are social justice advocates. I know a lot of you are very active on petitions and calling and going in town halls and contacting your members of Congress. Buy the book and write a letter. Get informed, understand the system, and go to events with politicians and ask them. Demand a bigger voice for people who are disabled and facing the system. This book is a roadmap that can help a lot of people. And I just can't suggest enough that people go out and get this book. And we have I believe Spencer has an announcement to make regarding, he just released his audiobook, and I believe he's got a surprise for one of our listeners.
Yeah, so the book last time I was here was in paperback, an ebook, and it's available on my website, bishinspublishing.com, at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Apple and all kinds of different places where you find books, right? But since then, we now have an audiobook. It took a long time, but I know but there's a substantial community that needs an audiobook. It might be because you have a vision impairment. It might be because you have a mental health impairment, and maybe or something like dyslexia, right? Like a reading impairment. It might just be that you're on the road. You're a trucker or something. You're on the road a lot. And you're like, I don't have time to read, but I'd love to listen to an audiobook. So whatever reason you need an audiobook, we went ahead and did one. And it's my voice, and you're going to hear me reading out my book, and I'll sound exactly like I'm sounding now. And to thank you and your listener, Sean, for having me back so that I could speak to all of the great Northwest and the great state of Washington and your listeners around the country and around the world. I want to give one of your listeners a copy of my audiobook.
That's great. Now, I thought you was going to say you was going to go to the listener's home and actually read it to them.
I mean, I guess we could arrange that, right? But you probably, if you're disabled and unable to work and try to figure out how to pay the bills, you probably don't have 7.5 hours to sit there and listen to me drone on. You probably want to listen while you're cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry, driving, doing something else, right? Multitask. I'd be happy to accompany you while you do any of these things, but only in headphone form.
So, if you're interested in the book, go ahead and put your email address, or I'm not sure how we're doing this, actually. I think that just go ahead and put a comment that you would like to have the book, and we're going to have a drawing, and we will announce the winner on the following episode. And I just want to thank you again for joining us, and thank you for coming back on the show. Always a pleasure to have you. Can't wait to see what shirt you wear next time. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sean. I'm always happy to come on and speak to the great state of Washington. I'm very fond of the state of Washington. I used to live in Tacoma, and
it's a beautiful
hope
state.
The Sounders have a good season. Hope the Mariners can get back in the playoffs this year. It is a beautiful state. I just couldn't quite handle the 3 p.m. sunsets. But other than that,
it gets cold. It gets cold.
Fantastic place to live.
Great. Thank you so much, Spencer. This has been Coup Save America, and everybody, we will see you next week.